Hello, Renegade marketers. If this is your first time listening, welcome. And if you're a regular listener, welcome back. Before I present today's episode, I am beyond thrilled to announce that our second in-person CMO Super Huddle is happening November 6th and 7th, 2025 in Palo Alto. Last year, we brought together 101 marketing leaders for a day of sharing, caring, and daring each other to greatness. And we're doing it again. Same venue, same energy, same ambition to challenge convention with an added half day strategy lab exclusively for marketing leaders. We're also excited to have Trust Radius and Boomerang as founding sponsors for this event. Early bird tickets are now available at CMOHuddles.com. You can even see a video there of what we did last year. Grab yours before they're gone. I promise you we will sell out, and it's going to be flocking awesomer. You're about to listen to a bonus huddle where experts share their insights into the topics of critical importance to our flocking awesome community, CMO Huddles. In this episode, executive recruiter Erica Seidel delivers a CMO pep talk on owning your job search. She offers candid advice on assessing opportunities, setting the right criteria, and staying in control through every stage of the hiring process. And I know it's hard. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. You'll be supporting our quest to be the #1 B2B marketing podcast. All right, let's dive in. Hello, huddlers. I'm excited to reintroduce you to Erica Seidel. Erica is an executive producer par excellence and operates a highly respected boutique. She joined us back in 2023 to talk about career management and has since launched both a podcast series and a newsletter that I can't recommend enough. And our live audiences obviously appreciate you, Erica, because they're showing up for you here. So with that, hello, Erica. How are you and where are you this fine day?
Hello, Drew. I'm home in Cambridge, outside Harvard Square.
All right. I was just in
Yep.
Cambridge. For heaven's sakes, I should have brought you over. We were at Forrester for a
Oh,
lunch huddle last,
yeah, I used
was
to
it?
work at Forrester. Yeah.
There you go. So, all right. So one of the things we want to do is just when we start these things today, given the fact everybody's busy, we want to make sure that we give them 3 things to think about right away that they may not be thinking about when it comes to CMOs, the hiring perspective. And then you and I can sort of go into those in detail, but perhaps it's like, what's the reality right now? What are sort of 3 things CMOs need to be thinking about?
Being intentional about finding out about the culture of a company that you might be joining, being intentional broadly
Okay.
speaking about like having a ideal CEO profile or an ideal company profile. That's one. I think another thing is that you're on a bit of a tightrope, both when you are looking at roles and trying to become the CMO that gets hired, or slash and when you're in a role, right? Because it's just like this is a role that's full of paradoxes, like grow now and grow in the future. I always talk about peacemaker, changemaker paradox, right? Make change, but also do it in a way that makes peace, etc. Be the creative person, but also be the super analytical person. And I think the third thing would be to there's a lot of emotions, a lot of angst, a lot of kind of career trauma lately, and try to limit emotional leakage with people who are kind of in charge of whether you're going to get a job or not, and whether you're going to stay in the job or not, and try to like remember the love of the craft and the love of educating people about it. That would be my top 3.
I love it. And we're going to go through each of those. But yeah, I almost want to start with the third one first, mainly because this is a pep talk. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we start there and we'll come back to the others, we meet a couple times a month with the transition team and we try to keep things positive, but it's hard. So remind us about the love of the job part.
Really interesting about CMOs, like before I started my practice 13, 14 years ago, I managed a business at Forrester, which was a CMO group. And what I noticed that's different about CMOs is that you get them in a room together and you don't have to do much effort to get them to talk to each other and to get to learn from each other. And that is not always the case. I don't know an executive search kind of group outside of, a few friends that I have in executive search that are very, close and that I can talk to and be like, oh, I got this weird situation. There's not 10 different groups like that. And not every function has that kind of thing. I think this is kind of not a market and not a time to go it alone. I think the best people are tapping their networks to help them find jobs, but having curated personal boards of advisors before they make decisions, before they have kind of critical, meetings or presentations, et cetera. Even having networks of people that they bring with them from one job to the next, or, consultants and stuff that they bring to the next. So I think if you kind of lean into the warmth of the community, I know that sounds a little, fuzzy, but that can be helpful. And, and some people like they do 4 or 5 CMO jobs and then they want to do something else. And that's okay too.
It is okay. It is not a life sentence.
Yeah.
Necessarily. It could be your life's work. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It's interesting. I was just thinking about our super huddle thing, and I was thinking about, okay, life after the CMO role and what that looks like, but we're not going to go there. I want to go back to, I think, a really important point in the job search process that folks think about, but not necessarily as often as they would if they were in the job. You talked about ICP and identifying the companies that you want to work with. Talk a little bit about what that means in, what I've seen, and for the most cases, round peg, round hole times 6 for most of the hires. And I'm wondering if for you, that's the same thing. And so what does that, if I'm a CMO in between opportunities, help me think about the ICP and how they should define it?
Everybody defines it differently. The key thing is having some specific criteria that you are going to use when you evaluate roles. So some people are very open-minded on what they do, but usually it's easier to be a little bit more focused. And some people have even like a specific, like kind of pressure testing playbook that they do. Like one of my podcasts is with Tracy Eiler. I don't know if she's on the call today. She's awesome. And whenever she looks at a new CMO role, she's ensconced now, but whatever, whenever she looks at a new role, she has certain, 10 things or something that she's looking at, right? And it could be, and it's different for everybody. Is there reasonable product market fit? And of course, company could say this, and maybe they used to have it, maybe they don't anymore. Maybe it's like, oh, they have to be profitable. They need to have a diverse leadership team, or they shouldn't have people from Dell that are like on the executive leadership team, all from one company. It could be, anything, like however you structure and frame this. And usually it's around the product, the market, the culture, the team, the CEO. Some people are allergic to CEOs who have only been the CEO once. Some people are allergic to founder CEOs. Some people are open to being a CMO as well as a number 2. So I also help CMOs build their teams. I think a big growth area is what I call CMOs hiring CMOs. So people who have been CMOs in one place go to a number 2 role at perhaps a bigger company. And some people want that and some people don't. But, again, like having this kind of specific criteria of what you're looking for. And then there's also, to your point, managing your energy so that you're putting it towards the roles that you are most likely to get. And in this industry, I always say, and I see a lot of friends here, but like I always say, CEOs and investors, they're looking for 11 out of 10 requirements. And in this market, they can usually find that. So if you have specific industry experience in one area, try to leverage that as much as possible, because that's going to help you.
So I'm thinking about the last, say, 5 to 10 CMOs who were on transition team who got jobs. And those are folks that were in between opportunities. Every single one, not to a letter, their new job looked like their old job. Like same industry, same vertical, same so forth. However, and what's funny is, but the CMOs that had jobs that moved, a lot of them took more interesting turns. They just see, and it's so interesting. It's like, I'll take a chance on you if you're employed, but if you're not employed, you better be 11 out of 10. Does that match with anything you're seeing, or is it's all about 11 out of 10?
Seeing a lot of 11 out of 10. I do a lot of private equity backed. And so I would say if it's a much larger company, that might be different. Well, it's funny. I don't see companies being too picky about whether somebody is currently employed or not, as long as there's a valid story. If somebody was, has 3 tenures in a row that were 6 months, 10 months, 11 months, something like that, that will raise some eyebrows. But for instance, I have a client recently who said, like, oh, okay, so these 3 people you presented all look decent. And this one actually, since they're in between jobs, they could join quickly and get the oars in the water quickly, and that's a plus, and just kept going, and it wasn't an issue that the person was in between.
So there's pep talk point number one, which is you are ready to start tomorrow. That's a competitive advantage. So I love that. So we can focus on that.
Yeah, good point.
Right? That's a thing. So you're ready to start tomorrow. And so I think that's really not an insignificant thing. It's a mindset thing, because a lot of what we're talking about is getting into this positive mindset, and you're dealing with emotional trauma. But the flip side of it is, boy, if you find the right place and you look like a really good match and you present yourself in the right way, it could happen fast. In theory.
We'll have more time to do the prep work that is entailed. Because if you have a job, a big job, and any job, you will end up, having to carve out time between an arduous interview process and the job. So I've had a bunch of candidates lately that have said, like, okay, I'm only looking at this one thing, or I'm only looking at 2 things at a time. So the more, like, if you're in between and you use your time wisely, you can research the hell out of companies and, do some work to differentiate yourself.
And let's talk about that, because we're here. What is, like, for people who you've helped place recently, their level of preparation is probably higher than it was they needed to do a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. What's that look like? What are they doing?
One thing that they do is it's very simple, but preparing a simple document or way of communicating that for each job they had, why did they enter it? Why did they leave it? How many people did they manage within it? What was the from to? What was, like, joined the company at 20 million, helped to get to 50 million, and started with a team of 2 and a budget of 1 million, and got to a team of 10 and a budget of 4 million. Profitability went from X to Y, and this is why I left the company. I mean, you can do this even if you're, employed. But another thing is just doing some show and tell. I love it when people come to an interview and they say, oh, here's my dashboard, or, here's my ROI model, and let me walk you through this, right? So that can be very helpful. Sometimes people will take a leap and say, oh, let me take a whack at what this would look like for this company. Like, here's a new messaging that might work. And that's a little dicey because, you're not going to know everything that you could before going in. But just showing that you want the job and that you're excited about the job and that your brain is activating, I think that's great. It's almost like if you show somebody some work, they kind of have to proverbially come around to your side of the table, and it's like you're looking at the same kind of thing together and on the same side of the table. So there's a kind of an emotional benefit to that.
So a lot of things to unpack. I want to emphasize that. So the idea is, one framework that I've found that folks have found useful is just hypotheses. It is okay to have hypotheses going into a job. You don't have answers. You have, based on the research that you've done. That is a way of engaging on a strategic level with it. But something you said earlier, I want to make sure that we unpack, which is there's a lot of things that don't show up on the resume. So, like, what are those things that don't show up on the resume that are often asked in the interviews?
It's the white space in between jobs.
Okay.
Why did you leave this job, and why did you enter this other one?
Okay.
So people care, especially early on in a process, they're very risk averse. It's scary to hire, right? It's like, oh, wow, like, this is a really high stake thing, and I'm going to give my growth engine to this person. I was interviewing Melissa Sargent. I don't know if she's on today, but she's great. I was interviewing her for my podcast, and she said CMO roles are really revenue rescue missions. And that's great. So if you're a CEO or an investor and you're considering handing over the growth reins to, whoever it is, CRO, CMO, it's going to be a little bit scary.
I love the notion that CMOs are on a revenue rescue mission. That certainly speaks to some of the things that, you were talking about, which is the third point of this balancer of changemaker and so forth. The change that seems, particularly for PE firms, is get more pipeline for less dollars.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the change make. It's funny because we all know, everybody on this call knows that it is not a put a quarter in, boom, pull it out. Yes, more pipeline, that there's a lot that goes into driving more pipeline, a lot of which is hard to measure, a lot of which will show up in revenue if you've done a number of things like, is there a good product market fit? Is everybody articulating the same story? Are they delivering value in conversations to customers? I mean, it's everything that the organization does, including how they treat their customers and their employees, that will lead to better pipeline, not just something magical that the marketer does. However, there is a perception out there that CMOs are magicians and they can be revenue makers. So how are you seeing CMOs walk that tightrope of walking into an interview and say, oh yeah, I can help you grow revenue, without putting themselves in an impossible situation of promising growth when the problem is probably not marketing?
Part of it is having that ideal company profile and those things to look at. So knowing when to say no to a role. And some roles are just not set up for success. And the sooner you figure that out, the better. It's like, far better to break up with the wrong person than marry the wrong person.
So far on our pep talk framework, we're saying so far it's you, at least in the PE world, are going to accept certain realities of the request of the job. Revenue driving, you need to be perceived as a revenue driving.
I think the other thing is having a good sense of short-term versus long-term alignment on the role. So often, what the investors want and what a CEO wants, what a CRO wants is, oh, I want the person who can just deliver leads and there's a pent-up demand for it. So they want the leads, this quarter. They want the pipe, and they think about it in terms of leads. It's not necessarily pipeline. So how can you get in and say, all right, need to focus on this for the short term, this for the long term. This is what's going to take, I anticipate that there's going to be some, the payoff for these initiatives is going to be 1 quarter out. The payoff for these initiatives is going to be, 3 quarters out or a year out. And maybe some things you don't do. Maybe you only focus on short-term stuff, which is a little bit, I was talking to somebody the other day. It's like, there's the fast food marketing, and then there's the kind of farm to table marketing. And a lot of companies, sadly, what they need is kind of the fast food, the quick kind of hit. And so you have to decide, can I deliver that? Should I deliver that? And how do I talk about the long-term stuff? Do I do the long-term stuff without talking about it? Do I do it kind of like in the background a little bit?
Yeah, this gets me into all sorts of frustrations that I have and rant about every Saturday. One being short-termism is that's again, a death sentence for CMO, because if you spend all your energy on short-term things, you're not doing what it is that marketing can truly do, which is impact employees, customers, and prospects. You're just looking at prospects who are in the market today. What we're talking about here is getting a job. So I'm gonna, there is an expression, I think, in the long term, we'll all be dead. So short-term is a fine time frame. To get the job, one needs to know what levers you can pull in order to have some impact short term. I'll live with that. And I think that probably our audience needs to live with that, right? We can't have a long-term conversation and make that the basis unless the CEO said so and the investors say so, and unlikely to be a PE firm in that context. Let's talk about when CMOs win, meaning when they get a job and they do it right. What were some of the building blocks that you're seeing? So you placed the candidate, or have already gotten them to the job. Yeah. What's going well?
A few different things. They're providing value quickly, or that it's the perception of value quickly. They are showing up well with the board, maybe coming in and saying, no, here's my hot take. Here are my hypotheses. I like your take on that. They are building relationships internally. CRO is their best friend. CFO is their best friend. In many cases, chief product officer is their best friend too. CMOs have to have a lot of friends. They are constantly kind of proving what they're doing on like giving me a small budget, I'll do a great job and then I'll try to, get more budget for that. I mean, there's a lot of these kind of cycles of like, rapid test and learn. There's this framework I put together too that like I think is really relevant. When CMOs fail versus when CMOs do a good job, there has to be a straight line. Picture a straight line going from CEO expectations to
Right.
CMO responsibilities to CMO, kind of a few different things, authority, incentives, and resources. And I would add to that like the timeline piece, the kind of like, are you on the same page in terms of short-term and long-term results? Because when a CEO thinks the job is one thing and a CMO's, the actual job is something else, bad things happen. If a CEO has expectations and the CMO does the job but doesn't have the resources to get it done right, bad things happen, right? If there's an expectation that Rome will be built in a day and then it doesn't get built in a day, bad things happen. But as long as there's conversations, about this, like it also like the CMO end up being the I keep talking about like the chief marketing education officer. So you have to kind of educate, sometimes subtly, nobody likes being like hit with a 2x4, about what the role is. So those are some things, that are happening when a person is successful, in their role. And it's not surprising, right?
No,
I mean,
it's not. I mean, the first chapter of my, in CMO's periodic table was about expectations and getting them right. If you don't, it's like a full stop. If you expectations are misaligned with the CEO and the board, it doesn't matter what else you do. The notion of showing progress is funny. It goes back to a conversation that we had with Michael Watkins, First 100 Days, about showing progress. But sometimes the showing progress is on a little thing that you could make a decision on and just got it done while you're trying to figure out the bigger things and building that. I wonder, it's funny because the relationship building and being friends, this is the sort of never eat alone kind of strategy, but everybody's remote. So it's a little harder. Right now. So you really have to work harder, and it may mean you need to have to get on a plane to make sure that you break bread with every single executive at least once in the first quarter, just to make sure that you've listened to them, and listen being probably the most important thing of all of it. So when they fail, so the successful thing we have alignment, we're showing progress, we built these relationships, when it's not working, obviously it's the opposite of those things, but is there anything else we need to think about from what you're seeing and why CMOs fail? And fail is even the right word.
Well, right. That's it. Is fail the right word? And because a lot of what I see is companies saying, is it the market or the marketer? Growth is off. What's where should we point the finger? And sometimes they're pointing at the CMO, VP marketing, head of marketing, whatever you call it. And sometimes that's not the right place to point. Sometimes it's just, the vibe can be off.
So it's interesting because right now, I think it's like 70% of B2B brands are seeing longer sales cycles and slower close rates. You're going to lay that on the CMO? It's a go-to-market strategy. It's a problem. And it's also macro issues, but no one accepts those. So if we just look at it and say, we have longer sales cycles and we have worse close rates, we have a go-to-market problem.
Yeah.
And, I think the CMO who can seize on that and say, okay, through a combination of things, we could make our product more appealing and easier to buy. From a combination of service standpoint, we could improve our reputation and make it easier for us to close. It's a reality right now that there's this notion that you can simply put a message out there. If you do the message, get the message right and put it in the right places, you're going to grow the business. It's too complicated. Forrester's latest research is 22 people on the buying committee, 9 are not even in the company. So it's, again, this is a very, very complicated world.
I think there's a really big difference between I have a marketing problem and we have a go-to-market problem. I remember this great guy, Justin Steinman, and he always talks about it's not my marketing budget, it's our marketing budget. So like, meet with the ELT, how do we want to spend our marketing budget? And that is there's a slight difference there, but I think that can make all the difference so that you're not pointing the finger at like one person. That's like, this is our problem.
Our problem. Well, and that, by the way, is really important in the scheme of things, because you've got crazies out there saying, nope, I want marketing to commit X, I want sales to commit Y, I want partners to commit Z in terms of, say, pipeline, when in fact, it's going to take at least sales and marketing together to close. There's no such thing as a purchase today that doesn't touch them. Marketing doesn't touch. It's lunacy to think about that. So if we're just talking about first touch or something like that, it still feels problematic. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. This show is brought to you by CMO Huddles, the only marketing community dedicated to B2B greatness and that donates 1% of revenue to the Global Penguin Society. Why? Well, it turns out that B2B CMOs and penguins have a lot in common. Both are highly curious and remarkable problem solvers. Both prevail in harsh environments by working together with peers, and both are remarkably mediagenic. And just as a group of penguins is called a huddle, our community of over 300 B2B marketing leaders huddle together to gain confidence, colleagues, and coverage. If you're a B2B CMO, why not dive into CMO Huddles by registering for our free starter program on CMOhuddles.com. Hope to see you in a huddle soon. Let's get back to, I'm a CMO right now. I happen to be between opportunities. What are some of the things that I can do before I have an interview and during an interview to increase the chances that I can land the role that I want to land?
So we've talked about a couple of them already, conquering your career trauma, developing a kind of ideal role profile or ideal CEO profile, and putting your energy where it's likely to be kind of matched and valued. Also figuring out, do you actually want to be the CMO? Or do you want to be a CMO, call it -1, like somebody reporting to a CMO, maybe at a bigger company? Sometimes the compensation is, quite similar. And, the role can be, just as meaty and just as interesting, maybe just as big of a budget. And, you don't want your ego to get in the way of a potentially good job. So there's that. Once you're in the interview process, have empathy for those lofty expectations. In a sense, because I know you said this is a pep talk, in a sense, the fact that a CEO and investors, they have really high expectations on marketing. That's great, right? That means that marketing, is kind of like the area that they're really looking at to grow the business, and they're not just putting it in the corner. And the fact that there's so much scrutiny, again, it means that the role is valued. So have empathy for those lofty expectations, and I'd say know when to rise to them and know when maybe they're a little bit too lofty. Everybody has to kind of do their own due diligence there. Like we were talking about before, you asked about white space. Head off concern about that white space on your resume. Sometimes if you have been re-recruited from a previous company, or like a previous boss has re-recruited you, or a previous colleague has re-recruited you, that's amazing. I love to see that. It kind of gives social proof. And then I would also say, anticipate in the process that there can be a hairpin turn from do you know marketing to do you speak investor?
Right.
So that's another thing just to be aware of. Also, finally, I would say top the recruiter. Like some of the best questions I get are things like, hey, what does the rest of the candidate pool look like? How do I compare? What are any concerns that you have about my candidacy?
And hopefully the recruiter will be honest.
Well,
Right.
yeah. I mean, it's like you just want to know what's the shape of things. Obviously, a recruiter can't tell you, oh, there's this person and they came from this company, but they can help sometimes a little bit more than you think. Again, this is the kind of the don't go it alone, have your board of advisors, type of group.
So we have a question from the audience, which is, and I'll just read it to you. You spoke to the holistic factors that drive revenue growth in successful companies, i.e. there are a lot of things going right, not just marketing. Any thoughts on how to frame that experience as an applicant when, we had a great product, we had great sales, we had great marketing? How much credit should the individual take in the to from statements?
I think that there's value in the market to being associated with a company that had a good scale up story. If you were at company XYZ as they scaled from, whatever, 50 million to 300 million and, a company that IPO'd, there's going to be a halo effect on you, rightly or wrongly, right? Because maybe it scaled despite your marketing contribution. Maybe it scaled because of partnership benefits, or maybe the overall market was growing 3 times the rate as your company. But still, I mean, take the win, declare success. And because even if it wasn't so much about marketing, you saw scale, right? Like if you see a company at, 2 or 3 different points in time, then, the implication is like, okay, you can manage a team of 5 people, and then you can manage a team of 10 people, and then manage a team of, 20 people. And as budgets increase, this is kind of where you're going to put extra money and how you're going to evolve the team over time. Like that's all related, whether or not the company scaled because of you.
And I suspect, and you tell me that you can also, as you talk about, let's say 50 to 100 million, you can say, here are the things that I learned that were
Yeah.
really important and how different it was at 50 versus 100. And
Yeah, exactly.
something that you learned as a result of it, even if you're not, yes, you were there, you can, you were the head of marketing during that period, and you might as well take credit for the results that happened because everybody else will. But, I think it is fair at some point to say marketing, like everything else, is a team sport. And it was really important that sales was aligned and product was aligned and our customer service was aligned. And we were all focused on, we had this whatever that really was behind the success of the company, so that you can speak to this larger notion. Okay, now we have another question, which is, how real is this notion that some CEOs just don't have an appreciation of what a great CMO can bring to the table? Let's start with the fact that less than 20% of CEOs spend a day in marketing. So that's one. If we're talking startup CEOs, first-time CEOs, when would they have gotten experience as a marketer? Doesn't happen. So, but they all watch the Super Bowl. So yes, they know marketing. I am increasingly unimpressed with the savvy of the CEOs at startups that I see in terms of marketing.
And unfortunately, the onus then is on the marketer to start speaking CEO, CFO, investor, right, and less on the other side to learn marketing. But it also means that as a marketing leader, you have to be clear about what metrics you share, when, and how much in detail you go into them, the vanity metrics versus value metrics, et cetera.
And it's interesting because I mean, in a B2B versus a B2C company, in a B2C company, let's just take Procter and Gamble or Coca-Cola. It's almost unimaginable that the CEO would not have spent some time in marketing, given how important marketing is to the selling of sugared water or the sell, and so at P&G, you come up through it. But the fundamental difference is when you're a product manager, you have a P&L, and very few CMOs in B2B have a P&L. So that is the challenge and the big fundamental difference, two things. So what about this? So right now, obviously, GenAI is taking over everything. There's no doubt that it's going to impact almost every aspect of work life. How important is CMO savviness on generative AI in showing in the hiring process? And are you seeing that now? And if so, what are some of the successful candidates showing?
Well, we were talking about it before. It's like this arc of, curiosity or enthusiasm, and then, getting into experimentation. A lot of people are just at the kind of experimentation stage, but some of them are showing some efficiencies.
Right.
And that's good. And to your point, Drew, maybe like that's not the right, kind of metric for it. So, I haven't yet had a CEO say, oh, I want the CMO to show how they can have a team that's half the size, leveraging more AI to kind of get there and achieve the same thing. They do talk about doing more with less.
Right.
And so there's a lot of ways to do more with less. But I'm curious about people, on the, I see there's a lot of, comments coming up, from people who are more in the roles and such.
Yeah. And I think it's just a matter of time. It's right, whether it's, in the 3 months or 6 months, but particularly as the stories come out, we had Lisa Gately from Forrester join us, and she talked about how one of the companies was able to I think as a result of just streamlining certain processes, it was the equivalent of 14 full-time employees that they were able to sort of, now it wasn't necessarily just marketing and so forth, but there's efficiencies waiting to happen on all sorts of areas. And we're seeing it in our community in terms of how the CMOs are using generative AI. And I'm just gonna make one other point because I can't help myself, which is we're beyond experimentation at this point, or should be, where it's not go play anymore. It's go solve a meaningful problem that the organization has, or that we in marketing have, and once we set those things, then we can figure out, okay, so how do we use Gen AI to solve that problem and help us? And that feels like a really enlightened step. And that, if we're thinking about a maturity model, that's the big step from go play, which is go plan, go solve a big problem. Anyway, so right now, as you're seeing it's not showing up, that doesn't necessarily mean it won't in a month or two.
Because CMOs are seen as like the innovation people and the bring new stuff into the company. I think some people are saying, oh okay, I now have this, on top of everything else in marketing, I also have to, be the kind of shepherd for AI and how the organization is going to use AI. And some people are very happy to take on that mantle.
Yes, it feels like it is a mantle that a CMO can take up. And I know that Lauren Boyman at KPMG is on the internal adoption committee, and one was a leader of that. And we talked about that at an event a year ago. And so, but it's, as far as I'm concerned, it puts the CMO on another plane. It's not just, hey, you're the marketing person, but you're also the organizational change driver that will enable us to be more competitive in the future. And that feels a lot bigger than, drive some leads.
Yeah.
Isabel Papilias, come on down.
Hi,
Isabel.
Hey, Erica, how are you? It's so great to see you here. You're the best, seriously. Small world. I just wanted to provide, I'm a focus group of one, but I'm in 3 different interview cycles right now. And not even now, but AI has never come up with a single company in my interview process, which I find fascinating. And just food for thought for everyone here. It doesn't come up until I bring it up. And I think that's definitely extra points. But it's interesting to see how CEOs are, at least the ones I talk to, are not thinking about this. And I think the opportunity, like you said, Drew, is not just to bring it up in the conversation in the context of how marketing uses it and productivity and stuff, but it's broader. What is your AI philosophy for integrating it within the organization to help you meet your objectives as a company? And how does that trickle down by function? And I'm completely stealing this from Tani, by the way, who did a webinar a few weeks ago, right? But her whole philosophy on how to think about it enterprise-wide is helping me having conversations with CEOs when I'm seeing that AI is totally not on the radar.
Yeah. It would feel that way, Isabel, that knowing it, understanding it. And this gets back to something, Erica, you and I were talking about. The different efficiency is a short-term thing, and it sounds great, but I think opportunity to be better, faster, not just faster, or, yes, you could talk about efficiency, but it's about efficiency towards what gain. And if your marketing is more effective and efficient, go you, right? But the challenge is that so many folks went on ChatGPT early on, asked it to write something. It was pretty mediocre, and they walked away. It's like, no, it's not about content creation. So this is the one hurdle that I think CMOs are facing, which is those people who are GenAI, just aware enough about generative AI to say, oh yeah, you can create stuff with it, to think, oh, well, I don't need an agency anymore. I don't need copywriters anymore. And that is pretty far from the truth. So there is again, a maturity model that I think the CMO has an opportunity to lead. So thank you for that. Andy D. Andy, you have a question.
No, I was going to respond to that with a very contrarian perspective. The AI landscape is changing so fast that they're trying to figure out what their AI strategy should be. And by the way, Gen AI is reaching a point of diminishing returns, and AI is far more than Gen AI. So
no doubt about that. I don't think anybody's arguing that. It's just, it's transformative. And Interesting. Well, but my question is, Andy, for you, are you seeing this in the marketplace? In other words,
it got me my last job. The job I landed was because I am a thought leader in AI, and I'm actually going to influence product management, shape their AI strategy.
So you fully embraced it. You had, right. And so you were able to get a job as a result of it. Awesome. Ellie Amadu, your question.
Hi, Erica. Good to see you.
Hi, Ellie.
Hello. When I was reading a lot of job descriptions, my question is not the tactics, but are there truly differences in skill sets when job description says, I'm looking for a CMO who has scaled from 0 to 10 million or 10 to 50 and 50 to 1. The tactics could be different than the way we think about marketing, but are the skill sets really different?
Great question. Love that.
Between a 0 to 10 and a 50 to 100.
A CMO who has scaled 0, because the job descriptions get so specific. I'm looking for a CMO who has scaled a company, regardless of the vertical, regardless of environment. They have scaled.
I have a client who said at one point, because I was getting wrapped up in the whole, this person has scaled from 10 to 20, but not 15 to 30 or, whatever. And he was like, I want somebody with experience at a big company who knows how it's done and also experience at a small company. And I was like, I can give that. This is no problem. And so often that's the spirit behind it. You can work in a bigger organization and you've seen, once a company scales, you've seen what that's like, and you've seen best of breed, and you have a nice network, and you have shown that you can roll up your sleeves. Sometimes that's all it is. Sometimes people get very specific about it. I wrote a couple of articles about this, and it's like, the pros and cons of, they're on my side, but the pros and cons of it, because again, you could have a company that scales from 30, but the marketing team is more akin to a $100 million company, or your marketing team could be more akin to a $5 million company. So you can get kind of wrapped up in your underwear about is this candidate absolutely the right one? And then in the end, it often comes down to, okay, can we picture this person in the role? Do they have the oomph to do this job? I think it's a kind of a silly reason to ding somebody if they have relevant experience in scaling, even if it's not absolutely specifically what the company is planning to do.
Yeah, it's just, Ellie, it is this 11 out of 10 thing. Well, if I can find someone who's done 50 to 100 million, great. And I've seen this now in the transition team where someone said, well, it was 50 to 100. Now they want someone who's 50 to 500. And they saw that as a completely different thing. And it's frustrating because they're building blocks. And, at the end of the day, you're going to set a strategy, you're going to hire great people and, and you're going to allocate resources, and it's the same job. Unfortunately, that isn't the hiring environment that we're dealing with right now. So Erica, before we let these lovely people go and we promised a pep talk, let's give them sort of 3 positive things to be thinking about in their moment of transition.
Positive things. Yeah, you probably have more capability for a role than you think. And just by talking to people, you might surface things like for instance, I've interviewed people and I've said, why'd you move from this company to this one? I got recruited. Because my former boss went to this company and they recruited me. They didn't know that was such a juicy thing for me to hear. And some people have talked about, I joined this company this time and then, and scaled. And, some people can be very, very lackadaisical about it. And then I'm saying, oh my goodness, wow, you've done this huge thing. I didn't realize that. So sometimes the experience is just right there under your fingers. The other thing is, you only need one job. Seeing less frustration or less, kind of stigma to being in between roles. So that's good. It is taking, some people are taking a while to find their next step. And so they're out for a little bit longer than they expected, but then they're very happy when they do land. I think the other thing is that some years are not about work so much. Some years are more about personal milestones and personal messes and other things. And just knowing that work is one part of your life. And some years, you're packing in 3 years of career development in that 1 year. And other years, it's a little bit less. And hopefully it evens out over time.
So I love this sort of thing because there's such an aura of positivity on it, is that you're more capable than you think, and you're sort of, don't beat yourself up for, I didn't do this. Just remind yourself of the things that you have accomplished. Don't undersell your capabilities. You talked about focus is your friend, and the fact that, you just need one job. So you don't need to pursue 100 necessarily. And then this sort of personal milestones. I love that British have an expression called garden leave, where they just, they're off for 6 months or a year, and they're like, they're taking a walkabout, as the Australians would say. But you don't have to apologize for those, and these things are very acceptable. I think the last sort of thing on this is give yourself a little grace in that it does take time. It does take time. So, Erica also talked about the need to prep, because you only need one job, but you might see the job that you have, the need to prepare and be able to answer some of the questions and fill in the white space. No excuse not to. So, and by the way, that the whole purpose of our transition team is to make sure that you're not doing this alone. And that's, for those of you who are in transition, come check it out. You can have a free month in our program, and you'll get a lot of value just out of that. But our whole goal is to help you structurally work with others so that you're not going it alone. Erica Seidel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Drew.
If you're a B2B CMO and you want to hear more conversations like this one, find out if you qualify to join our community of sharing, caring, and daring CMOs at CMOHuddles.com. Renegade Marketers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neisser. Hey, that's me. This show is produced by Melissa Caffrey, Laura Parkin, and Ishar Cuevas. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and the intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, and learn more about CMO Huddles or my CMO coaching service, please visit renegademarketing.com. I'm your host, Drew Neisser. Until next time, keep those renegade marketing caps on and strong.